Did studying Indian music make it easy to meet girls?
Indian girls.
If so, could you tell us something about some of those girls and the role of some of those girls in your experience of Indian music?
Well, I remember when I was living in Baliganj, through some strange quirk, well actually it's because I knew someone called Sindhu Rani, and through her I met Mun Sen, who today is a famous movie film star. But I met her, she must have been, I was probably 19 or no, I was 20 or 21, and she was probably a little younger, maybe 18 or 19. And her mom was a famous film star, I forget her name, but if you mention her name to any Indian, they flip out. But Mun was her sister, her daughter. And somehow I met her, and she thought it was kind of, romantic and idealistic that you were an American studying Indian classical music. She was just, very curious and interested in that. So she would come over to my place, and I lived in this tiny room above a garage. You could barely stand up, and it was hot, and you had to be half naked all the time just to live there. And there was no furniture. And she would come over, and it was like kind of an ascetic, it's like going to the guys who hang out in the parking lot or something. For her, she had lived in this very fancy house. And she would come over and just was so curious why I, an American, would be studying Indian music. And then the censure was, her mom had a tambura for some reason at the house, and had no idea how to tune it. And I had been learning, I forgot to say, in Calcutta I was learning with Sunil Bose, a great vocalist. And I thought to balance the tabla I needed to learn something about ragas. So I was learning vocal, and I had tambura and all this. So I went over to her house to tune her mom's tambura. And her mom thought, what a bang-up guy.
What a catch.
This is...
What a catch.
Yeah, what a catch. This is the kind of guy I need hanging around my daughter. He's into Indian culture. She's, going to get too flaky otherwise or something. And anyways, the mom really liked me and thought I was safe. She thought I was celibate or something. I was in an ascetic or something, studying Indian, a monk studying Indian music. Anyways, compared to, I guess, her other friends. And actually, you were around there, and so Gunilla was in Calcutta at that time. I remember, because she met Mun too, and Mun felt very at ease when she'd come over, and there'd be sort of another girl there, like around her age. And it was just kind of a very nice thing. And finally, Mun expressed an interest in studying Indian vocal music. So I went to Sunil Bose, and I said, I met this Indian girl, and she wants to study vocal music. And he threw his hands up in the air, and he said, they're hopeless, they'll come, they won't learn anything, it's just a whole big show to make them more marriageable or something. Yeah. But they're not seriously interested in classical music, which is what we're really looking for. But rather reluctantly, he acquiesced, and she came over and started, it was also a little income for him. So she started taking lessons. I think it lasted like 3 months or something. But I met a movie star through Indian music.
Did you ever kiss her?
I think
Let's think about that question for a minute.
I did namaste about 1,000 times, but I can't say that I got any further than first base.
Guys like us don't get to kiss girls like that. Chaz, did you discover
that
learning
Indian
music enabled you to meet girls? And if so, could you tell us about some of them?
No, I did learn Indian music to meet girls, and I didn't care about girls. I cared about
came to
music.
Thailand to meet
I came to Thailand to meet girls.
Later on, after my 9-year marriage to an American woman, and after a lot of heavy karma, I came to Thailand. Now I've met lots of girls. I've continued with Indian music. But
are there more girls in Thailand than Raginis?
No.
That's a good question.
That is a good question. It's a very good question.
No, let's be serious. Indian music is not for girls.
It's not for meeting girls. You
Not
mean
for
the way
meeting
rock
Not for
musicians.
meeting girls.
But are there Indian music groupies?
I think there are.
Because I know when Nikhil Banerjee would play in Calcutta, the first, let's say, 9 rows was nothing but
Right.
young Bengali
Screaming.
girls, because the sweetness of his technique, and Bengalis love sweets, would just charm the
Jesus out of them.
saris off of them.
Pants off. Ooh.
But don't you agree? I mean, musicians do have a big female following.
Yes, because music is very sensual and it's the sign of virility.
Also, Veer Ras.
Yeah.
You know, Veer Ras is actually the same root as our word virility.
Yeah.
Or virtue. How's that?
Virtuous virility.
Virtuous virility. That's what I think. If you study Indian,
Righteous virility.
but I think, dear audience member Andy, that in all fairness to your question, that was perhaps our experience. But for Indian musicians, I can say for a fact, without revealing any names, that the more famous ones do get kind of groupie types.
I remember when I was sailing.
Who literally would do anything for them because they're put up on a pedestal like sort of a god, almost like a god.
They
I
have
mean,
the keys to the kingdom, and they
the
wanna share
great
'em with
musicians
you.
have something, and this is an interesting thing which no one has. Like if you go to an Indian music concert in the front rows, if it's not young Bengali girls, it's the bankers, the politicians,
Rich people.
the wealthy Mawaris, the
Gandhis.
Gujaratis, whatever, the most wealthy, powerful, influential ministers of parliament are sitting in the front row, kowtowing to the musicians, going ooh ooh ah ah. Why? Because they have all the money in the world, but this musician has something that they don't have,
But also
that they can never get, and that is, like you say, the keys to the kingdom. They can just swing open the door and say, "Oh, Rag Darbari, here it is." They don't have Rag Darbari in their safety deposit vault, but the musicians do.
And at the very top of society, they worship and cherish their music. But when you go to one of the big outdoor concerts, what other elements of society are also there worshiping their
The music?
that aspect of their culture? Hanging on the outside the.
You mean beside the really wealthy who have the VIP seats and
Right. At an outdoor concert, then you look out and when you go out, and all the
And
rickshaw
it's-
drivers are just hanging out
that's
there on
right.
the
And they're
fence.
listening on loudspeakers because they're not allowed, because they don't have money for a ticket. But the programs are broadcast onto the street so that even the poor. That's a really interesting thing. That's true. So even people without tickets can enjoy. That's how ubiquitous it is. It's for everyone. The music is really for everyone.
So would you say then that Indian music permeates its culture in a way that we're not familiar with in America?
Well, I mean, from what I was told, that 50 to 100 years ago, you couldn't go to an Indian music concert. You couldn't buy a ticket and go to a concert. It was court music. It was in the Mughal courts, first of all. It was for a very small group. It's like Padmasambhava only teaching 25 disciples at once. It was for a small group. It was like chamber
The
music.
music room. The music room.
The music room is a perfect example by Satyajit Ray.
Yeah.
And I think he's related to Kailash Ray. Anyways,
Kailash Ray is Satyajit Ray's grandnephew and heir to the fortune.
By the way, we're talking about the musicians. So on Flower Raj, there's a few Indian musicians that are listed there. There are hundreds that have been omitted, and we'd like to mention
Yes.
some of their names.
very good
Good.
point.
While I have a partial list in my mind.
Good.
So I will start with famous sarod players in the last century that I've thought of. I'm sure there are many more. I'm sorry for the omission of the ones we don't know about. But these people certainly should be mentioned, and that we'll start with Ustad Ayad Ali Khan, who was the brother of Ustad Alauddin Khan, and the guru of Hemant Sen, teaching him how to make sarod. One of the 5 brothers in the Ali Akbar Khan family. So he was a Surbahar player for Tagore. and he lived in Shantiniketan and Maihar and worked with Alauddin Khan, homogenizing and standardizing the sarod, which was invented 150 to 180 years ago. And he was actually credited with the modern invention of sarod, with 25 strings, a flat bottom, a long stainless fingerboard, and the shape of the present-day sarod, being able to play at C sharp and play modern classical Indian music. Previously it was tuned to a lower pitch, and there was many variations in the sarod. Then we have Ustad Alauddin Khan, who is the father of Ustad Ali Akbar Khan, and who was the father of the present-day generation of North Indian music. Ravi Shankar, Ali Akbar, Annapurna Devi Bahadur Khan, Ashish Khan, Timur Baran, Jotin Bhattacharya, Tabla Paul, Guru, all these people, Panalal Ghosh. Many of the modern-day Indian musicians all studied with Alauddin Khan. Then we have his contemporary Guru Bhai, Ustad Hafiz Ali Khan, who was the father of Ustad Amjad Ali Khan, and Hafiz Ali and Alauddin both studied with Wazir Khan in Rampur. So they were Guru Bhais, but they had two separate sarod gharanas. Then we come down, we have recently deceased Ustad Ali Akbar Khan, who passed about 2 years ago in California after more than 40 years of teaching.
Son of Alauddin.
Son of Alauddin Khan.
What about, if I might ask, what about some of your contemporaries studying Indian music? I mean, there's a huge multi-hundred-year history of Indian music, but you guys also had some very interesting contemporaries, basically freaks like you who took a lot of acid, probably a few hits too much, and fell in love with a culture that wasn't your own. And there were other guys like you. Could you tell a story or two about them? Because
let him finish his list.
We can, but
Yeah, let him finish his list, and then
talk
that's a
little
good
bit about some
place
people
to
that people may actually know.
Yeah.
there are many people here who deserve to be mentioned.
Absolutely.
Too many to count.
No, we don't need to count.
Good.
Ustad Ali Akbar Khan, Ustad Bahadur Khan, who was my sarod guru, and the first cousin of Ali Akbar Khan, died in 1989 in Calcutta. Sri Danish Khan, who was one of Ali Akbar Khan's sons, a great sarod player, a very sweet man, lived in Calcutta. Passed Jotin Bhattacharya, who lived in Benares. Sri Suprabhat Paul, who was my first sarod teacher in Lucknow. Vasant Rai,
Who lived in New York for many years.
New York. Sri Jeffrey Lipner, who was an American genius sarod player.
What happened to him?
He died in Calcutta in 1988. Stephen James, also a very fine sarod player. Sri Keith Redman, who was a friend of all of ours, who was American genius sarod player, could play all the Ali Akbar recorded tans by memory, and had a real feeling for the ras of raga and tala, who played sarod in the late 60s, had a fantastic Hiran Roy sarod, who passed away in Kathmandu. What year?
Hiran?
Keith.
Yes.
70s?
I don't.
70s, yeah.
Then there was Ustad Niyamatullah Khan, Ustad Sakawat Hussain Khan, Ahmad Ali Khan, Mudru Khan, Pandit Radhika Mohan Moitra, Kalyan Mukherjee,
Yes. Sham Ganguly.
Karamatullah Khan, Radhika Mohan Moitra,
Sharon Rani.
also who recently passed away.
Yes.
Then Shanai, Ustad Bismillah Khan, about 4 or 5
This is
years
another
ago.
instrument.
He passed away.
Like an oboe
The
instrument.
greatest Shanai player.
Oh, magician.
Sitar, Pandit Nikil Banerjee, Vilayat Hussain Khan, Indranil Bhattacharya,
Imran Khan.
Ustad Inayat Khan,
Right.
Imdad Khan, Ilyas Khan,
Shujat
Balaram
Khan.
Pathak.
Nishad Khan.
Balaram
No,
Pathak.
they're not dead. These are only dead musicians.
Oh.
Nishad is not
They
dead.
will be
Imrad
dead.
is not dead.
They're
We'll
going
all
to
be
be dead
dead.
someday.
We'll all be
They may
dead.
be dead and not even know it.
Ustad Ahmed,
Well, at least we got history here going on.
in the field of tabla, Ustad Masid Khan.
Masid Khan,
Ustad,
father of Karamat Khan.
Alaraka.
Ustad Ahmadjan Tirakwa.
Yes.
Ustad Karamatullah Khan.
Yes.
Ustad Alaraka Khan. Sri Pandit Gyan Ghosh, Gyan Prakash Ghosh.
Wazir Ali Khan, he was the Khalifa of the Lucknow Gharana. His, he's passed away.
Okay.
And his son is Afaq Hussain Khan, who is still alive.
Okay. Anoki Lal Misra, Kante Maharaj, Pandit Kishan Maharaj,
Yes.
Sri Kanai Dutt, Chatra Lal, Mahapurush Misra,
Wow.
Shanta Prasad, Kali Prasad, and many, many others that haven't been mentioned. I'd like to keep this list for
Well said.
Flower Raj.
Well said. Well said.
They lived for music. Their whole life was music, and they were famous.
An inspiration to all who followed, certainly. And they are survived by, in some cases, their children, their sons or their daughters, and in the greater family by their students, who, you know, when you study music, you become part of a family. It's not as simple as, you don't get a degree. You know, when I was in Calcutta, I would go every year to immigration to get a new student visa. I got 5 one-year student visas. It was unheard of. And the only thing they would do is they'd look at my finger and they'd see if I had a callus. And and that was like the proof.
Yeah.
If I had callus, then you were really
Good,
practicing
they're good,
music. And that was the thing. And these guys, you know, little scarves and everything to CID, would come up and yes, he's studying. And then they said, well, ask your teacher, how long are you going to be here? How long is this going to go? And so I asked Kermit, and they said, write a letter. So Kermit wrote a letter, and he said, well, some students, they can learn in 5 years. Some students take 10 years.
12,
some
yeah.
students, they're never going to learn their whole life. They're going to be here forever. So I brought that to the immigration, and they weren't quite sure which
category you were.
So they said, oh, fuck it, just keep checking his fingers every year. And on the basis of that, and studying with a great teacher, I got 5 one-year visas.
Wow. That's
And that was, in those days, you had to, and you remember Cowboy Bob Barnum was another American during that period, 70 to 75, which, by the way, was in the middle of the war with Bangladesh happened, Mukti Bahini and all this. But Bob Barnum was an American who studied with Imran Khan, and he should be on Flower Raj also.
Steve Landsworth.
He lives in California. He was driving a truck. He has a Bengali wife, as far as I know. And very nice guy. And I remember Imrad's kids used to look at him all starry-eyed and say, are you a real cowboy?
Tell
His
us
name
about
was
Alan,
Cowboy Bob.
tell us about Alan Truffy Mativi.
Oh, that's another story. But anyways, Cowboy Bob had been in the Army, so under the GI Bill of Rights, he got an education kind of money for education. He wrote a letter to his senator in wherever it was, and the senator wrote a letter and he got permission to join. He joined Rabindra Bharati University in Calcutta, where his, let's see, who was, I think Indrano was teaching there. One of the sitar players in
From Ali Akbar School.
yeah, was teaching there, and so he was able to get his visa through the university and also get the scholarship paid for. But I actually got the visa for 5 years, mind you, just on the basis of them checking my callus, because tabla players get a callus in 2 places on the forefinger. They usually get it. I noticed Kermit's callus was here. Most tabla players have a callus here, but his was here because, you know, it's like choking up on a bat. He sort of pulled it all the way to the end, and so he was playing literally with the tips of his fingers. So the callus ended up here. And the other place you get a callus is here. Is from doing biowork. And I remember I used to give, after my lesson, Kermit would be tired or something, and he'd go like this. He'd throw his arm out, on the bed, and that meant I want a massage. You know, it's just like that. And so I would do massage, and he would sort of tell me how to massage and everything. And I remember doing his hands, and I thought, his hands are like...
Ending?
No happy ending.
No happy ending.
I mean, I'm alive. I guess that's
the happy ending.
That's the happy ending. You got to
Did
admit.
have a happy ending.
But I remember his hands were like baby's hands. You know, if you ever shake hands with a conga player, the guy, it's like shaking hands with a, bottom of someone's flip flop.
Yeah.
His hands were extremely soft, and that's a characteristic of the Frikabad style. Is that, and even Benares tabla players, they're whacking those things like pakal edges. But in Keramits, in Frikabad, it's very delicate. It's a vocal, if you can believe it, it's a vocal style of drumming. Frikabad, it's like Gayaki Yang, you could say. But his hands were like baby's hands. I remember that, and that always